Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Emma. I upload videos every Sunday and Wednesday, and they're all about lifestyle, DIYs, productivity, and home things because I am an architect and I also own my own company called We Are Forma. So hence the title of this video, because I thought it might be fun to do a little bit of a series, maybe once a month, if that's something you guys are interested in, learning a little bit more about the kind of next layer down of home things. I think there's a lot of information out there that is very generalized, but I did want to give some more specific industry advice or kind of dispel a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on. So if you are building or renovating or even just styling up your home, you can start to get a little bit more educated on how to make those choices and what some of the jargon means, because I know it is literally like looking at a different language sometimes when it's something that you're not familiar with, and I want to help you guys out as much as possible. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and without further ado, let's just get straight into the video. So I do have my laptop beside me and I am going to pop up a couple of images on screen as I'm talking through things, but if I'm ever looking down, it's just because I'm checking a little bit of information on a couple of the subjects I wanted to talk about. But basically, I thought I might start off with simply what is an architect, because I know there are two streams, which you guys may have seen the words out there before. There are building designers and there are architects, and we are two very different people, but we do similar kinds of jobs. So there is always going to be a little bit of a fee variation if you've ever got a fee off a building designer versus an architect, and that is purely reflective of our different skill sets. So for me, I'm a registered architect, and the process of that kind of went a little bit something like I finished school, I had to get certain marks to get into my university degree, and I then studied a 4-year bachelor's and a 1-year master's, which will give you a Bachelor of Design, and that is in architecture. I also did a second major in interior design, and then I went back and did a Master of Architecture. So if you just graduate from either a TAFE course or from your Bachelor of Design, you will be a registered building designer if you choose to go down that avenue. But if you want to become a registered architect, you have to do the Masters at university. It's like another layer on top of your education, and even after that, you're still not a registered architect. You'll have to get 4,000 hours at your workplace and you register with the institute. So it's a little bit of a process, kind of like, accountants getting accredited or lawyers passing the bar. So for me, I'd already been working for literally 5 years as a student throughout my uni degree because I just was absolutely obsessed with design. So I never really wanted to have another job. I've always worked in my industry, which was very handy because once I got to the end of the degree, at least I knew it was exactly what I wanted to do. So I didn't have any study regret or anything. But basically after that, I went and worked in a practice. So I actually moved down to Melbourne, where I currently live now. And that's just because the building industry is busier here. I mean, it was at the time. I think Queensland is getting busier these days, and certainly the design landscape has changed up there a little bit, but at the time Melbourne was where the best opportunities were. So I moved here and I started working, and after I'd done 2 years of work, which is approximately what it took to get that 4,000 hours of kind of post-study experience, then I signed up to do the exam, and you also do an interview in front of the board, and pending passing all of that, plus also submitting your logbook with all of your practical experience, you can then get registered to be an architect. So theoretically, it can take you 7 years. It might even take some people longer if they choose to not get registered straight away, which is totally fine. But the word architect is actually protected by the Australian Institute of Architects, and I think it's a really good thing because it makes sure that anyone who is engaging with an architect means that you can kind of rest assured that they've had all of this study and work experience behind them before they are legally allowed to call themselves an architect and kind of go out and do work on those sorts of jobs. So a lot of our job is risk mitigation, and that's something that is really, really important. And there are particular insurances we have to hold, like professional indemnity and public liability, because of course, when you're working in the landscape of building buildings that people will either be living, working, eating, or playing in, then you need to make sure they're really safe and sound and fit for purpose. So that's a really massive part of my job. It's making effectively spaces that enhance people's quality of life, but they also do need to be safe and practical for use as well. So that's an architect, that's what we do. And in terms of building a house or doing a house renovation, an architect will always be more expensive than a building designer, and that is because a building designer is someone who can draw your plans, they will liaise with the builder, and they will just kind of pass them on. So if you say you want a 4-bedroom house, they will be able to draw up a 4-bedroom plan. All of the dimensions and everything will be to the relevant legislation. They might draw a couple of basic elevations and, you know, submit your drawings to council for a planning permit, but that's kind of it. Like, they do the base level that is required to get a building built, and it doesn't necessarily have the design overlay sort of factor to it. So there certainly are building designers who do offer more of a design aesthetic, and that is all within that niche. But in terms of the actual real design that kind of goes into a building, that is architecture to me. And I might ruffle a few feathers saying that, but I mean, that is just my profession, and that's the way I feel about it, because an architect will go really deep down into every single little detail of what we're doing, whether it be the fixture or fitting you're using, the material, the way that the door sits, the way that the view aligns when you're walking down a corridor looking straight out into your backyard. There are so many consultants that we'll coordinate with. So whether it's a renovation, new build, apartment building, maybe you're doing a cafe or something, whatever it is, we like to consider absolutely everything about the experience, whether it be lighting levels or the views or the materiality, the sound in the space, all of these kinds of things. It might even be the heaviness of a door handle. Like, there is so much that goes into it. And because I also do the interior design side of things as well, then that is also a whole other part of the design process, which is not only about spatially getting everything right and having the right dimensions and proportions of space and light and feeling in the space, but it's also then about selecting the right palette of materials to complement all of that form as well. So there is a lot that goes into it, a lot of thought and time doing research and development and testing and trying and failing and succeeding. And that's why it's really handy that these days everything we do is in 3D. So what program do I use? I use Autodesk Revit, and I also use Enscape for a little bit of 3D rendering and views and things as well. But the primary documentation for, I would say, the majority of architects in Australia these days is Revit. There's certainly other programs out there like SketchUp and ArchiCAD and AutoCAD if you're a little bit more old school and you're doing some line work kind of drawings, but Revit to me is the industry standard, and it's just because it is a really practical program. You can do all of your sheets and layouts and things in there. You can do schedules for finishes and fixtures and doors and windows and all of those kinds of parts of the building. So all of those little bits and pieces get pulled out and detailed by us, but it's a really stress-free process for the client, and that's kind of the main thing. Once we do the initial briefing phase, then the rest of the process is meant to be really fun and laid back for the client. You should just be turning up to meetings, giving your input and feedback. That will then get incorporated to the drawings, and that kind of cyclical process happens the entire way until you kind of have to put a full stop on the drawings. You send them off to get priced by a builder, and then at that point you may start the building process. So little bit goes into it, quite a lot goes into it, but it doesn't need to be as scary as it seems when you're kind of looking to take on a project, whether it be a renovation, a new build. Someone asked if I could go through kind of the design from like A to B of like how you would even start with that kind of thing. So I'll give you a recent example from a client project. So somebody was looking at a number of sites around Melbourne, and they wanted to look at building some townhouses. So they wanted to subdivide on an existing block of land. So how would you even know if that's a good investment, or where do you even begin? So if you have some knowledge of the property space or property development, then you might be able to go out and potentially make an educated purchase on these kinds of things. But when people come to me, I like to do effectively like an envelope study or a feasibility study, which would be an early analysis of a site to kind of see its building potential. And the way that I would do that in terms of a feasibility study would be, there are planning websites where you can go and have a look at the title and see if there are any easements and things on the property, or what some of the existing conditions are of that particular site. Then you can look at the locality and any of the overlays that it has. So there might be particular planning zones, there might be a flood overlay, there could be any number of things. You could be in a flight path, like it is so varied, and particularly in cities, there are so many different sectors and suburbs where things have been broken up differently over time. So it is really important to kind of look at what are the constraints of your site before you kind of get a little bit too ahead of yourself thinking that you can build this enormous home on a block of land without sort of understanding. So For example, in this particular council that we were looking at, it had a maximum site area that you were allowed to build over, so site coverage percentage of 50%. So that means that the gross building floor area could only be 50% on this particular site. It also stipulated things like 25% of permeable landscape, which means, let's say like a driveway is hard landscaping, whereas like an actual garden bed is permeable landscape. So we already knew those kind of constraints, and then came in other things like the building setbacks that were required. So there was a 9-meter front boundary setback. There was also 3-meter side setbacks and a 4-meter setback from the back of the property. So before even thinking about what you could possibly design on this space, I now already have a rough kind of guide on what area I can use up, what is the available kind of space on that site where a house could be situated, and then you can go the next level and start analyzing particular things about the site again on another spectrum. So then you have what is the orientation of the site, like where is north, south, east, and west in terms of how that would reflect in the living spaces and the way that you might start to spatially diagrammatically understand the home. So if you wanted to have, let's say, living areas facing to the north to take advantage of some of that beautiful sunlight all year round, then you can really start to figure out how you would orientate a plan. So that early phase feasibility study is really, really handy. Sometimes I do them after people have already purchased a site, but sometimes I do them prior to kind of help someone with a little bit of a ballpark estimate of what is possible for their site. So of course, there are no guarantees, and that is heavily stipulated in so much of what I do, because the risk is ultimately with the client, because it depends on what the council will come back and say. But there are certain things like the RES code, which is the residential developments code that I kind of refer to. And there are a number of rules in there that you kind of go through with either a planner or the architect themselves, and we will look at all of those different bits and pieces, and that really starts to inform what is possible for your site, what the setbacks would be, what the height of the building could be. And generally speaking, you can definitely liaise with the council and look at getting your plans approved based off adhering to all of these laws. So if you're kind of wanting to color outside the lines a little bit, or do something a little bit different that maybe doesn't necessarily align with the neighborhood character in terms of shape and materiality, or maybe you're wanting to go higher than is being presently allowed. So there's a lot of different factors that can kind of come into it, but that is something that means it is really good to have like a town planner on your team early on, because an architect only knows about what we know about, and then there are other specialist consultants we will kind of engage. So another question I had is about total project costs and working out kind of ballpark figures around how much it would literally cost to do a project, whether it be a renovation or a new build, and what kind of goes into creating a project team to get something like that done. Okay, so let's start off with this handy little list, and I am actually going to be putting this up as a resource, a free resource on my website. So if you ever want to download any of these as ebooks, you'll be able to do so. I'll leave the link to the We Are Former website in the description box down below, but this is what I give to people to kind of help them understand a ballpark figure of some of the costs involved in working on your home. So one of the first consultants I would recommend engaging is a land surveyor. So their job is the drawing of title boundaries, site features and levels, and plans of subdivision. The rough cost of one of these consultants can be anywhere between $1,000 and $4,000, and of course this is all just indicative pricing only, so you best off doing your own research for any of these, but it just is some helpful ballpark figures on the construction costs that I find in Melbourne, Australia. A town planner would be another consultant I would get on board. Your town planner can assist with planning permits if required, and they can cost anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000. I prefer to use a town planner on complex projects because they know the legislation inside out, and they may also have some contacts at the local council as well. So they're definitely a great option if you think your project may need it. A quantity surveyor is the one who ascertains the cost of building works. So they can cost anywhere between $900 and $3,000, and it is very, very helpful to have a quantity surveyor. So you may have heard in some recent news of people talking about volume builders or builders in general, and the construction prices going up and up and up, and people's houses no longer becoming affordable because of the price of building materials and just building costs in general in the construction industry. So Having a quantity surveyor on board is huge in terms of being able to track your price. So I would create the drawings and then we would send them to the quantity surveyor with enough detail that they could liaise with me and the drawings, and between the two of us we would be able to get a better ballpark figure of what your home is going to cost. And of course there are ballpark figure estimates, which I'll get onto later in the video, but it's really difficult to say with bespoke residential homes because it comes down to the level of finish in terms of low, medium, or high, in terms of your palette of materials and just the things that you're asking for. There are also particular construction techniques or styles of homes which are going to be more expensive just due to the nature of their complexity. So yet again, you could kind of pop them on a low, medium, and high scale depending on what you're asking for, but having a quantity surveyor is worth its weight in gold because it will allow you to keep track of the budget so there are no surprises. Another useful consultant is an arborist who can report on existing trees as requested by the authorities. So what I mean when I say authority is usually council, and their cost may be between $500 and $1,500. Another person who is very helpful to have on your consultant team can be a geotechnical engineer. So if you're in an area where there may be concerns and you're looking at doing some excavation, a geotechnical engineer can do a soil test, and that may be anywhere between $300 and $800. Next up would be a structural engineer. So a structural engineer, as per the name, does the structural design of the home or renovation or whatever it is, and they're very handy to get involved. So particularly in renovation projects where you may be dealing with an existing building, if you're wanting to knock out walls or take things down, having a structural engineer is essential because they're going to be able to do a review of what's there and let you know which walls are load bearing and which are not, and that can start to inform the possibilities of where we're able to take the design. In terms of a new build, a structural engineer is also required because they are the ones who will make sure the building is standing up. So of course there is some understanding from an architect's point of view, but ultimately it comes down to the structural engineer figuring out the base structure of the building and where any load-bearing walls need to go so that the building is structurally sound, and that is a very, very important job, so it's great to have a knowledgeable consultant on that. You may also require an energy consultant who will do an energy report and rating on the home, so that can be anywhere between $500 and $1,000. So this is when you hear people talking about a house being, for example, 7 stars or having some passive things involved and sustainability. So if there are any concerns with that, or you're trying to hit a particular star rating, or you're concerned about, for example, the amount of glazing in a home, then an energy consultant will do a full review of all of that and be able to give a report and a rating. Next up is a traffic engineer. So traffic engineer's job is to report on achieving safe movement of cars in and out of the site. For example, they may look at car turning circles so that you know that the driveways are efficient, and their fee can vary. It is very, very different between different entries to if you're coming off a busy road, or maybe you're looking at multiple cars going into a car park. So it's really handy to have a traffic engineer do a holistic review of what's going on the site and be able to give you a report. Lastly, you would need a building surveyor. So their job is arguably one of the more important ones. They have the authority to issue a building permit, and they will also assess the architectural and interior design and ensure construction conforms to local building regulations. So their fee can be anywhere from about $5,000 upwards, and there may be a government levy involved as well. So yet again, all of these prices are indicative only, but it just kind of helps give you a little bit more of an overview of a ballpark figure on some of the other costs associated with doing a building, because it's not just the building cost alone that is kind of one portion of it. You then have the architect's fees, the consultant's fees, and contingencies that you really should be allowing for any little things that can kind of happen along the way as well, because you never know with construction, it can kind of vary, and it's really important that you allow the correct funds so that you're able to achieve your dream home without kind of running into little hiccups and then feeling like you're short on cash. So it's definitely better to have your kind of costs and budget prepared up front so you know what to expect. So in terms of the building process from A to B, it is sometimes a linear process, and sometimes it kind of goes back and forth a little bit if you're teetering between making some design changes and then reincorporating them. So it's not always straightforward, but if it is, it would be an absolute dream project. So I'm going to go through this step by step, but you can also find this on the architecture page of my website if you're ever wanting to kind of see a little bit of a project overview of what it means to kind of do your home from start to finish. So like I said earlier, the first stage I would always recommend is to do some due diligence on the site. So this would mean just checking with all of the local planning regulations and making sure you can kind of do what you're aspiring to do. And that due diligence or feasibility study is the first phase for any project, just to kind of re-establish the site and understand what's going on. The next phase is one of my favorite parts of the entire design process, and that is the concept design. So in this phase, I would sit down with the client, whoever they may be, and we will start to do a little bit of a briefing. So I would send out a Pinterest board. I would also start discussing budget, and I would also be looking at your overall brief for how you're wanting to use the space and what kind of things you're wanting to be included. So this is where we go really broad and we just have an open mind and look at all of the possibilities for what you might want. So that might be a fireplace, a swimming pool, 4 bedrooms, a room for the kids. Like, it could be anything. It might be a really luxurious bathroom or a home gym, like something that really speaks to you and how you and your family or you alone use the space. And that's where we really start to inform the decisions about materiality, about what is important in terms of the hierarchy of spaces, and what is kind of on your wish list versus what is on your essentials list. So that concept phase is quite long, and it really is about just nailing the design in every way and testing and trying some of those options. And I would usually present around 1 to 3 options to a client so they can kind of stew on them, get comfortable with it. We would have multiple workshops and meetings, and then we would be comfortable enough with a selected design to move on to the next phase. So after the concept design comes design development, and design development is the phase where we start preparing the drawings to get a town planning permit. So we're putting together a pack of drawings that are kind of running in parallel. So there's the DD drawings, which is design development, and then there's the TP drawings, which is town planning. So these two packages kind of run in parallel because these ones are like the site plan, the floor plans, specific dimensions around setbacks, elevations, materiality, and there's a specific number of drawings that we need to submit to council to kind of give them an overall picture of what it is that we're going to be doing on the site. In the meantime, the design development is going on, and that's where I'm starting to do detailed drawings of everything that we are capturing, whether it be a facade detail, a detail of the bathroom. It might be figuring out the fireplace and the logistics of how that would work and getting a consultant or a supplier involved to start giving some feedback. At this point, we might also bring in some of those consultants that had been talked about earlier, like the structural engineer or electrical engineer, whoever it may be, and they will start to contribute to the design as well so that we can holistically work together as a team to get together the best outcome and understand any of the parts that aren't quite working. And that's where we will have our own separate workshops where we kind of develop the design up to a phase where it could be priced. The next phase is called contract documentation or construction documentation, and this is where we get serious. So in this phase, we're doing highly detailed drawings, whether it be drawings, schedules, specifications, whatever is required to obtain the building permit. So at this point, the building surveyor will be involved and they will be reviewing all consultants' packages for compliance. And this is a really interesting phase because that's where we would then be able to secure the services of a builder and start negotiating and going out to tender. So I would always recommend people try and go out to tender to at least 3 to 4 builders. So you're kind of getting different pricing and also different relationships. So you can sort of start to pick who might be the best person for your job. And it's not always the least expensive or the most expensive. Sometimes it's the happy medium, sometimes it's one of those, or it might just be someone who you really gel with and you feel like is going to make the building process smooth and enjoyable for you. And those prices should hopefully come back all in alignment relatively, but sometimes there are discrepancies, and this phase is where we would kind of question any of the differentiation in that pricing as well. So during that tendering phase, the builders might kind of fire off some questions and ask for more details. So that could take a little bit of back and forth as well. And once you've selected and appointed a builder, it is time to get out on site. They will start with some early works and, doing any of the demolition or excavation and things as well. And this is a really exciting phase because you can kind of have a couple of site meetings, and I would be liaising with the builder throughout. They might send me things called RFIs, which is a request for information, and that is where I talk to them and help them understand the design intent and the drawings, and we really just start to bring your project to life. So of course the building process is not quick. It takes a number of months to happen, and it may even take up to a year or more for your project to be built, but all of that would be outlined by the builder in their expected timeframes in their workflow. So you would definitely have a sort of end date in mind where you'll know you'll be able to move in, let's say by 2025 in May, or whatever the date is that they might give you. And that is pretty much it. That's basically the overview of how a project would run if it went from start to finish. So that's it for this video. I may do another one next month if you guys are enjoying this and you find this information helpful. But in the meantime, if you happen to have any questions and you want to know about any of these things in a little bit more detail for one of your own projects, feel free to head over to the website. I've got an appointment where you can book in for a 15-minute Zoom call with me, and we can have a quick chat to see if I might be able to help you with your project. But I hope you've really enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions that you'd like answered in a future Ask an Architect video, feel free to leave them in the description box down below. Bye.